The lack of good governance and leadership at state-owned entities has, over the years, cost South Africa billions in taxpayer money. Corruption has also weakened key institutions, discouraged investment, and undermined government's program to address poverty and unemployment. Well, what are the different mechanisms which SOEs should be adopting to improve the state of affairs? We're joined by corporate and trade lawyer Ronny Mkhwanazi. He's got his own ideas on solutions to your time tonight, Ronny. It's interesting that you say that the fight at Old Mutual, which of course has been so public, displays the fact that SOEs and corporate South Africa are no different. What informs that?
Oh yes, thank you for having me, Cathy. Look, over the past few years, there's been a lot of attack on the leadership of SOCs. For obvious reasons, firstly from a performance point of view, but also from a leadership point of view. And unfortunately, recently we've seen a lot of, corporate scandals coming out. For example, Steinhoff, which was, quite a huge, a scandal insofar as corporate South Africa is concerned. And more recently with Old Mutual, and of course many more that are not in the public domain as we speak now. And this has, shown that as a society, the problems we have are not necessarily in the public sector, but that the public sector battles, with the same problems, which is an issue of lack of, clear understanding of what boards of directors should be doing. The utterances, for example, by the chairman of Old Mutual after the court had a finding of the role that a board should be playing. And of course, the board in that instance, is within its right, for example, to take disciplinary action. But the accused person also has, a legal right to defend himself. And I think that is just an example of showing where there's a lack of understanding from a corporate governance point of view. So it's almost as if, as a society, we really need to get to the, to the root cause of what is it that we should really be focusing on to make sure we improve the efficiencies and profitability of our organization.
Sure, and the word profitable is an important one here, and perhaps a key distinguisher, because when it comes to SOEs, where they fail, it's not shareholders that have to pay the cost there. Yeah. It's you and I, the South African taxpayer, whereas corporates are much more diligent with their bottom line. Perhaps the Steinhoff examples will be, one rare occasions where public money is also involved.
Yes, absolutely. So yes, you're right. The corporates are more focused on the bottom line, as you said. The SOEs find themselves in a very difficult situation because they don't only have that, corporate ambition, but they also have socio-economic responsibilities that they have to implement. And in the main, that is why governments around the world would create state-owned companies so that, they assist the state in ensuring that the government is able to achieve its socio-economic objectives. If you take an example of Eskom, as a critical example, because it supplies the country with electricity. If you had to privatize that and have many players in the market, you may find that we lose control of the cost of electricity, and for that reason, that's why SOCs find themselves in a difficult situation. And also, of course, the root cause, I think, in our environment right now is that there's a systemic problem we have in terms of our governance model. And for example, you know that it's public record that there's about 700 or so state-owned, let me call it entities, because you say companies got a different connotation. But what this means is that you have your national, entities, your provincial ones, your municipal ones, and in addition to that, you have state-owned, state agencies, like your Cultural Human Rights Commission and so forth. But you have regulators as well, like the Civil Aviation Authority, which effectively is a regulator and should not be having a board. So I think we actually need to go back to the fundamentals of corporate leadership and say, let's distinguish between SOCs, which are effectively companies, which has a bottom line responsibility, and let's take those that are not corporations. As I've given an example, I gave an example on the Civil Aviation Authority. That's a regulator. It regulates the aviation industry. What do we do with the board there? Because if you have a regulator, the regulator is supposed to have regulatory authority, over the institution. And that shows you where the confusion lies. So what then happens is that you have a convoluted leadership structure where you have a CEO of an SOC, for example, who has to go through rigorous interviews, rigorous recruitment processes to become a CEO, and then suddenly you have a board that is appointed who half of the time are new to the industry, don't know what's happening in the industry and so forth. So you're now saying that this qualified technician should now be, reporting to this guy who has no clue generally what's going on in the industry. And for that reason, that's why we have the problems in the SOCs. There's slow decision making or no decision making. The boards are not being evaluated, which is quite strange because the CEO and his team, they enter into performance contracts where they have to be evaluated. But why not with boards? So unless we have the consequence management right and resolve the problems at a systemic level, we will continue to be bailing out our SICs for the next 100 years.
Ultimately, how things are structured, even when it comes to the appointment of those boards and the individuals appointed to those boards, it's all political, right? Yes. It's because of the different interests that need to be managed from a politics perspective. Do you think that we're likely to change then the status quo at SOEs without changing the politics and the nature of politics of the day? Because, of course, all political parties would argue that, well, of course we would want to be able to have a say on the board of this organization because they must be there to ensure that the policy of our organization is being implemented, and this is what the people of South Africa want. Yes.
In fact, you will recall, Cathy, that a few years ago there was a commission set up to review, state-owned companies. I think it was called the Presidential Review Commission on SOCs, headed by General Pierre. And I mean, there's a report that came out on restructuring effectively the SOCs. So we're not in want of solutions. We have those solutions. They're just in a drawer somewhere, and they need to be pulled out from there. So I think the idea is to say that, of course, political appointments, especially in a business environment, are very tricky. Because, generally politicians are not business people. So you need to change the framework. And hence, one of the recommendations that came from the report was to say that let's create a shareholders committee within the state, which will effectively have oversight of the state-owned entities and make sure that we have a common approach to what we want to achieve instead of working in silos as we currently do, and ensure that, you have the right people in place. And sometimes, unfortunately, when it comes to political appointments, it's not only in South Africa where we have that type of problem insofar as politicians appointing board members. The UK has the same model. But some countries like New Zealand, for example, have perfected the model where they actually have set up an institution that is purely geared and focused on the recruitment, vetting and training of board members to ensure that the process is much more effective and practical, so to speak.
It sounds like we could be light years away from the New Zealand model, but that's just from my skeptical self.
Keep the faith, Cathy.
All right, we'll leave it there for tonight. Ronny Mkhwanazi, he's a corporate and trade lawyer at Mkhwanazi and specializes in law, commercial law, corporate law and governance, amongst many others. We're going to take a short break. I'm back after this with your headlines. After that, we take a look at South Africa's consumer spending. So our debt levels have increased and we're also defaulting on many loans. I wonder if it's a sign of the tough economic times that we're in. So we'll take a look at one of the latest surveys then that has been watching consumer spending in the country. Do stay with us. This is News at Prime.